and good morning, everyone. We are starting our webinar.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first of a series of virtual meetings hosted by the UK Department for International Trade, featuring UK companies. This morning, I'm pleased that our first company focuses on environmental and social issues. Clean growth is key to the UK industrial strategy. That means driving economic growth whilst reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And next year we'll host COP26 in Glasgow. Mining, by some people, is a rather old-fashioned and polluting business. But we know that mined products are essential to clean growth. Batteries use traditional metals like copper, tin and nickel, as well as the rare earth and lithium that everyone talks about. Clean energy turbines and solar panels also need mined products. The computers that we've all relied on whilst we've been working at home during COVID need those mined products. So mining is fundamental, but we need to do it sustainably. We also need to make sure we engage society, that we gain social license to operate. There may be issues like the recent Norilsk spill, and they need to be dealt with responsibly. The UK has a long mining history. Tin and copper have been mined since the Bronze Age. High-quality coal powered the Industrial Revolution. And UK suppliers develop durable quality solutions to meet the needs of the domestic industry. Now most of those products are exported overseas, and UK companies have had to innovate and adapt to different countries in order to compete. As the UK evolved to a more service-led economy, mines closed, and the legacy of mining had to be dealt with. It was painful, and we learned a lot, and we'd like to share some of that to prevent you having to repeat the mistakes that we made, and to learn from the good practice that we've learned. As exploration restarts in Cornwall, Scotland, Northern Ireland, new and less invasive methods are being applied. The Eastern Europe and Central Asian region is very rich in mineral resources and home to many world-class companies and deposits. The region is becoming increasingly conscious of environmental and social issues, with new mining codes and new environmental codes being implemented in the region. So we wanted to share an industry-leading company who focus on this field. ERM, or Environmental Resource Management, have solutions across the environmental and social value chain, including less invasive exploration techniques, environmental and social planning, water management, and mine closure. So I hope you find this and the following virtual meeting useful, and I'd like to hand over to my colleague Olga to introduce.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here today, and it's a great privilege to have our colleagues from ERM with us today, who will share their extensive knowledge, experience, and expertise. As most of you know, ERM is a global company who provide a number of various services which are closely connected to sustainable development. As Ross mentioned, health and safety, risk management, social aspects, and many others. And it is indeed a global company because it has an extensive network of offices around the globe. in 40 countries, and actually they also have offices in Russia and Kazakhstan. So that's why I'm pretty sure that most of you know the company, had an opportunity to cooperate with the company, or maybe working with the company at the moment, which is absolutely great. And colleagues from ARM operate in various sectors, and they have been involved in a number of exciting projects across the globe in various industries, such as oil and gas, mining and metals, power, pharmaceuticals, chemical, and manufacturing. And ARM work closely with their customers and clients across the whole process of the operations and projects, starting from strategy development, considering new markets, and go into change of strategy, go into ensuring improving performance results, and basically going to retiring of assets and planning legacy. And now I would like to introduce colleagues from ERM who will be speaking to all of you very shortly. I would like to introduce Geraint Bowden, who has a very extensive experience in working in mining and metals, power and brownfield projects, 30 years experience actually. He is now very much focused on mining and metals due diligence, legacy planning and assets closure. Then Geraint is joined by his colleagues Simon Tillotson, partner at ERM, and Alistair Flaherty, also partner at ERM. All of them will cover different aspects of environmental and social aspects today. And before I hand over to colleagues from ERM, I would like to mention that you will be able to raise any questions after each theme colleagues will cover during their presentation. You will also have an opportunity to ask your questions after the very end of the presentation. And after a Q&A session, you will have an opportunity to have one-to-ones and networking opportunities in a very special virtual room, which is reserved for these purposes. Instructions and link which will enable you to enter that special virtual room, you will be able to find under the broadcast screen. And I will touch upon it a bit later after the session is over. So thank you again for joining. And now I would like to hand over to Geraint and his colleagues to start their presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Olga. It's Geraint Bowden here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody, wherever you may be in the world. First, like to check that you can see the slide, the cover slide, and hear me correctly. So, Olga, let me know if I'm not coming through clearly. Thank you so much for attending this webinar, and thank you so much to colleagues in DIT for giving us this opportunity to speak to you, to Minex, Arthur and Irina for organising the delivery of this webinar, and to you all for turning up. This is a presentation around ERM services in the environments and social space particularly, but also health and safety in the mining sector, as it best applies to the particular circumstances in the country of Kazakhstan and the surrounding region. So ERM offers services throughout the mine life cycle, from the earliest stages of prior to exploration even through to closure. This won't be a presentation about listing everything that ERM does. This is a presentation about things that we think are particularly interesting, innovative, and relevant to all of you. So we will cover technical topics around minimizing environmental and social risk, new techniques in the field of exploration, in operation, in environmental management, in tailings, and in closure. As Olga mentioned, my two colleagues, Simon Tillotson and Alistair Fulton, will be doing most of the presentation actually. And also available on the webinar, we have my colleague Elena Amikanova from ERM Moscow, and also three colleagues from our new sister company, CSA Global, Graham Jeffries, Serik Urbinusnov, and Maxim Seredkin. So I'll just do 2 introductory slides and then hand over to my colleagues. So this slide is a piece of context, really. It's a summary of some research work that ERM undertook back in 2008 to 2012. We then repeated that research in 2016 to see how the conclusions might have changed with time. And the main conclusion, the study work involved reviewing publicly available information on over 60 mining projects worldwide to determine the reasons for delays and why they might have actually been delayed. And this study work concluded that amazingly, or maybe not so amazingly, more than 50% of mining projects are not delivered on schedule. And when we repeated the work in 2016, the conclusions were even more stark. But probably the most interesting aspect and relevant to this session is that over half of the projects that were delayed cited environment and social issues as the primary reason for delay. And in the inset into that slide, you can see a breakdown of some of those: stakeholder opposition, environmental concerns, permitting issues, and technical issues were actually in some ways less of a reason for delay. So addressing environmental and social matters properly at the outset of a project is of incredible importance to that project progressing and progressing to cost and schedule. What our research revealed was that there are billions of dollars of our clients' money tied up in delays where projects haven't addressed these issues correctly. So this is why we are particularly passionate about the work that we do, and why we think it's so relevant to mining companies all over the world, not just in this region. And turning to the region, I thought I would put a slide up showing our credentials. This is a summary of the projects that ERM has undertaken in recent years in Kazakhstan and nearby regions. And I won't talk through the slide in detail because I think it speaks for itself in terms of the visual on this slide. I also mentioned that we have a new sister company. Well, not quite so new, actually. It's now amazingly a year since CSA Global and ERM merged to form one single company. And CSA Global, you probably know, are deeply involved as a pure play mining consultancy in everything from exploration to resource evaluation to health and safety to operational improvement, incorporating scoping studies, PEA, financing, pre-feasibility study. And this is one of 2 slides which I've just included to summarize the incredible depth of experience that CSA also has in the region. And we are in the process of integrating our branding so that in future this information will be presented as one, so that this is the next slide, which shows a further list of projects that CSA have been involved in, and I'm sure that many of the people on this webinar were also involved in those and will recognize the projects, the mining companies, and the great work that CSA undertook on these projects. So I'll just hand over to my colleague, Alistair Fulton, who'll give a very quick overview of social standards and risk associated with mining in the region, and then we'll go over to Simon Tillotson. So, Alistair.
Thanks, Geraint. Hello, everyone. I'm Alistair Fulton, a partner at ERM, and my particular role at ERM is focused on working with miners and with banks and with government agencies, both in the region and internationally, on how do we make mining sustainable, and from the perspective of the banks, how do we manage environmental and social risk? We've already heard in the introduction that we're looking for sustainable mining, and Geraint has summarized some of the environmental and social risks, which not infrequently cause delays to projects and cause problems with financial institutions who want to invest in mining companies. I've worked in Kazakhstan for over 20 years, and investor interest in Kazakhstan has increased exponentially in that period. And so, we have the IFC, we have the Asian Development Bank, we have EBRD, all traditional investors. But now we have many private equity houses, we have many commercial banks, and we also have government export credit agencies like UKEF, which is the organization which provides finance for projects in other countries, including Kazakhstan. And all of these agencies are very actively looking at projects in your region, but they also have very strict sustainability standards. And one thing I would say to mining companies who are looking to attract international project finance, be it from a multilateral bank like EBRD, be it from an export credit agency like UKEF, or be it a commercial bank, these standards will apply. They are clear but onerous. And one of the things that is vital is that you have an advisor who can work with you on meeting those standards. And that includes helping with impact assessment studies, helping with management plans, helping with management systems, and who can talk to investors in their language, their risk management language, but who can also work with you on environmental and social performance issues. We have worked quite successfully in Kazakhstan on a number of financial transactions. We're involved in others at the present time. But one of the success factors, which is absolutely fundamental, is understanding lender risk management requirements on environmental and social issues, and also engaging early with lenders. Some other important issues are summarized in this slide, but I can't overemphasize early engagement, understanding the standards, and having an environmental and social advisor who can help you generate the deliverables which demonstrate to banks, financial institutions, that you have a systematic and robust approach to managing environmental and social risks. So in terms of the work we're doing with mining companies in Kazakhstan, in the region, there are a number of ways in which we find we can be extremely helpful, both in providing robust environmental and social support, but perhaps as critically, making sure that you can get your hands on investment money efficiently and effectively. So one of the things we encourage companies to do is to look at potential environmental and social red flags. So is your asset in or close to a designated protected area? Is it close to communities? Will it involve extensive use of land which is currently used for another use, for instance, agriculture? Will it involve use of water from scarce areas where water is a scarce natural resource? These red flags are not things which need to stop a project, but they are all things which you need to think about early and which financial institutions place a very high price on. If you have to move a community of 2,000 people, the banks will want to know why can't you move? Is this really necessary? How do you propose to do it, and over what period of time? Another thing which banks look for is that the environmental and social work is integrated into the design and development of the project. It isn't just an afterthought. Too often we see cases where impact assessments have been produced, but they actually don't really relate to the design very closely. Dealing with stakeholders, communities, government agencies, NGOs is fundamental. Proof of effective engagement, of information sharing, of disclosure of information is fundamental to getting hold of the money. And then last but not least, for banks and finance houses, the environmental and social management system is actually far more important than the impact assessment. The impact assessment is for permitting purposes and for describing and assessing impacts, but it is the management system which demonstrates that you, company X, have a systematic and robust way of managing risk going forward. That is the key. And again, we see many projects which don't have a robust, systematic, transparent ESMS, and that can certainly delay finance quite considerably. So we are happy to work with companies on every aspect of environmental and social performance and dealing with the risk management requirements of financial investors. Thank you very much. Simon, I think.
Yes, thank you very much. I was just getting my microphone back on. Good morning, good afternoon to you all, and thanks for taking the time to listen to our presentation and webinar. What I'm going to do is just touch on three different areas of the technical side of mining where we do quite a bit of work. I'm going to look at water and just elements around a catchment approach to water-related issues, to understand risks and issues from the earliest point and be able to design and understand them so that you're managing that whole issue around water and water scarcity over time. The second one is closure. That's increasingly becoming a big ticket item around as more and more mine sites come towards closure, and liabilities and risks and issues amount around them. And then finally, one of those issues is tailings, and nobody can be not aware of all the issues around tailings dam failures and some of the things that we're doing around that. So let's start with, if I can get this to work, there we go. Let's start with water. So what do we mean by catchment approach? So exploration and mining activities are under pressure for access to and the use of increasingly limited water resources. So that means that they're more sensitive to outside the fence line influences. So companies can't guarantee existing permits or water allocations will last unchanged throughout the mine life of mine. So companies often have a good handle on their site-wide water balance. But our approach puts that into a regional and catchment context, and identifies the risks and opportunities which are often not visible at the site scale. So how do you understand where the greatest sensitivities are? So it may well be that your mine site is the most efficient in water use that it could ever be, and yet it is still taking 90% of the available water in the catchment. How do you understand that? How do you know that? And how do you have a management around that? So we use this approach from its earliest stages, and an early application of it is to exploration. We have a tool, an approach called CSET, Catchment Scale Exploration Tool. And this looks at geochemical data from springs, from groundwater wells or stream water, and we look to identify the geochemical signatures of mineral deposits. So water falls from the sky, it goes into the ground, and it will at some point pass through a resource, and it will pick up elements from that resource so that we can geochemically identify that signature. And once you've found that water with that signature, which is equivalent to a copper porphyry or whatever you're looking for, you can then say, where did that water come from? And use a catchment scale approach, a very simplistic catchment scale approach, to understand where that water came from and backtrack along. So on the next slide. So this is an example from a blind porphyry at about 400 meters depth with post-mineralization cover. What we did here is we took samples from springs and groundwater wells in the area around it, and used and identified the signal for the copper porphyry, and then backtracked those signals to the specific area. So we successfully identified a mineralization, and new targets were drilled, and mineralization was found. So it's a very useful technique. If I just go on to the next slide. But this approach actually can use existing water data sets. So it can be completely desk-based if the data is available. So in these days when accessing going out and field work is more limited than it has been in the past, this is one area where we can actually use exploration monies to actually get ahead of the game in terms of targeting. So the tool can be used to generate new targets, to confirm, to do confirmation drilling on expected targets, to really target in on those particular areas. It can investigate resource extensions in a brownfield setting, and it can also be used either in due diligence or before a concession surrendered, just to check that either the conditions are prevalent for the right resources, or that you haven't missed anything using all the other techniques. This method isn't a standalone. It links in with all the other geochemical and geophysical methodologies that are used. It's an extra layer of information, but it allows you to do things without necessarily having to go into the field to do it. So, and the catchment modeling element of it can be a useful basis to build on for later stages. So you can, if you've set it up for your exploration and it moves to pre-feasibility, feasibility, and onwards, you can look at it to look at water supply constraints for the basis of an ESHA baseline, and also to support for a support in mine design. So the image here shows that the term catchment can be more loosely applied to understand the wide variety of stakeholders who may have an impact on or interest in your project. So understanding the water balance at catchment level helps identify these at all scales. ERM's tools provide readily comprehensible and defensible tools to engage with stakeholders. The concept is to approach the water as a shared resource, and I'll come back to a shared resource when I get onto closure in a minute or two. And sort of understanding the drives for current and potential future water stress around your operation is really important, so that you're able to have a positive influence on catchment water stewardship. We use this approach at one site where the client was unaware that the movement of ore took a 50,000 population equivalent water supply from one catchment and took it to another catchment, and then when it was dewatered, the water was dumped into the sea rather than be reused, despite the fact it was in a very water stressed area. So not really understanding those elements leads you to create risks and issues for yourself, but actually also it can allow you to better mitigate risks and capitalize on the opportunities that are given by that wider understanding. So this is a case study that we have, and our simple catchment groundwater model was put together with existing data. No additional drilling and no testing were required. So it allowed the client on site to design an appropriate water dam. The original designs wouldn't fill and/or would have had a greater impact on existing users. Also, it used existing hydrogeochemistry to model water quality change of the dam, which had a significant impact on the plant design. So the water balance was created, which identified a better and more sustainable, effective water withdrawal strategy, leading to the first seasonal abstraction permit in Brazil. So without the understanding of the wider permit and how the site and the mining fit within it, it was going to be very difficult to achieve what was ultimately achieved. So closure. I think we would all recognise that closure is a material risk to mining companies, and that more and more the mining sector is beginning to better understand the potential total cost for closure. It is in the billions of dollars. You have, for example, Rio Tinto that is declaring $11 billion in its provisions around closure. And time and time again, as you look more and more and do more and more detailed studies on closure, the costs just seem to go up. And there's a growing realization that it's often unrealistic and very optimistic, and the other thing that is understood or is more and more understood is that the design and operation of a mining site does not bear any resemblance to or an understanding of the closure liabilities that are posed in closure. It's seen as somebody else's problem. And as with water, I think the better sense in this is to understand what everything you do in the design and the operation of a mine site, how will that affect closure and the closure provisions, and how you're actually going to manage those provisions and those closure as it goes on. Also, we see that more and more that closed sites are finding it very difficult to be relinquished. So mining companies are having longer and longer periods of time where they're managing the consequences of the operational issues and the designs of the site. So ongoing in perpetuity water treatment systems, management of rehabilitation areas for many years into decades. So is there a better way of dealing with this? I think what we have come to realize is that just in the same way as with water, understanding the setting of the site within the wider context is really important, because mine sites have been developed and created economies and communities and increase the socioeconomic value of the area in which they stand. If they then close and all of a sudden there is nothing to replace it, then the issues will mount in terms of social and economic and unrest and stakeholder concerns. So I think there is a need to move a conversation around mine closure and look at it within the regional context. So what can the site transition to that will maintain a socioeconomic value and create that value and help to reduce those liabilities? So we're looking at this as reimagining, repurposing, or unconstraining the thoughts that are around closure and how closure should be considered, and taking it from other sectors where successful regeneration and successful job creation, successful value creations have occurred, and where that's happened in all sectors, there's been a number of conditions for that successful regeneration, for creating the positive and lasting legacy. These are set out in this slide, and we've narrowed it down to six factors that we believe are important to be thought about within a closure context, irrespective of the sector, but is becoming more and more relevant to mining as liabilities and costs increase. And those are making sure that you've got a very clear and robust post-mining vision, understanding the local context, so the local environment, social and economic conditions, and that what you're doing and your vision you have is backed by and supported by local stakeholders. What's also really important is a liability protection. So what mechanisms, both financial and legal, do you have which allows you to make sure that the vision and the solutions are shared amongst many people, and that the mining company alone isn't responsible for everything. There's also got to be leadership, and all the successful ones have been seen to be a single person, has been a person that everything has coalesced around, who is credible and collaborative with all stakeholders. What's really also important is effective funding, and that funding doesn't have to be, as Alistair said earlier, it doesn't have to be just from the mining company itself. It can be brought much wider funding from local, from regional, from international funders. And also there needs to be a measurable outcome. So what is it you're trying to get to, and can you measure against it? And can you look at sustainable design, sustainable metrics that you can look against, so you can see that you're getting to your objectives. So some of the things that we have here that we think underpins a sort of the reimagining of closure. So not just take it back to what it used to be and grass it over, but actually create a vibrant, ongoing economy that's post mining. So they're all listed out. I'm not going to just read them out, but I think the two or three things to really remember is that the boundaries of mine closure extend beyond the fence line and include the region with its mining. And the lands and infrastructure used for mining may provide future value for the company for other land users. So don't just rip them up and take them away and just regrass it. Look at what opportunities there are, particularly in today's world with renewables, solar, wind, hydrogen. A lot of things that could be taken and make the value and the shared value of the future to be as important as possible. Okay, that's closure. One final comment I would have is focusing the study requirements. We do a lot of work where we look at the understanding where the greatest risks and greatest uncertainties are, and we use financial modeling techniques to do that. And it's not just getting a cost of closure or a cost of anything, it's understanding what the variables across each of the things that make up the cost are, and also understanding where the greatest uncertainties are. So we do modeling where we look at we focus on the uncertainties, and this image here, the yellow bars that you can see on the right hand side show the ones with the greatest uncertainty. So for example, we did some work for a nuclear facility that was decommissioning, and a lot of time and effort in the costing was done on rates of people over time, because there are 120 years of operations at decommissioning. And what we found when we used this approach was that actually it was irrelevant what the different rates of people's time were. What was the most important element was how much aluminium was contaminated. So instead of focusing huge amounts of time and effort on understanding people and roles and rates, it was more important to really get to the bottom of how much steel or aluminium it was contaminated, because that's where the major into the billions of dollars of uncertainties were. So that's a technique we use. I just wanted to briefly mention that. So the last topic I wanted to just come to was tailings. So, title of this is Tailings, Not Just Stability Analysis. So I just wanted to read a quote from the UN to you. It says, despite many good intentions and investments in improved practices, large storage facilities built to contain mine tailings can leak or collapse. These incidents are even more probable due to climate change effects. When they occur, they can destroy entire communities and livelihoods and remain the biggest environmental disaster threat related to mining. That's, I think we all recognize and acknowledge that. But I think what and the Church of England Disclosure Initiative has really continued to drive that home. But what we come across a lot is that the focus on dam management is on engineering. It's all about we have good engineers. It's not going to fail. We're going to add engineering support measures to make sure it doesn't fail. But that's not the full story. Engineering is not the ultimate answer. You know, redesigning tailings dams, going from wet stacking to dry stacking, looking at where you place those facilities are all important. When we did a study of 11 major dam failures between 2006 and 2016, and it showed that the organizational and human factors issues are contributing to failure perhaps just as much as engineering. So it's all very well you've engineered it, but are you managing it properly? Are the people that are monitoring and understanding it, are they understanding what they need to do, or are they being driven by other factors such as they've been told what to do and not to worry about certain things? So are there financial pressures or decision making, or operational leadership or competence issues which are driving it? So that's one element of it. And then the second element of it is that despite all of that, we get at least 3 dams fail every year. Mostly you don't hear about them because mostly they don't have any major impact. But when you do hear about them, that's when the impacts are driven. San Marco and Burdino, they are both creating potential liabilities for Vale in the billions of dollars, and yet both of those failures kill little or no people. And yet there are tailings dams all around the world where there are big settlements, cities, towns, villages that are all directly beneath the tailings dams. And also, do people understand what the natural and social capital around and beneath those tailings are? So, what we focus on is we focus on not only demonstrating that the stability of the dam structures, you know, so we acknowledge that whilst demonstrating the stability of the dam structure is essential, but so is understand the consequence in the event of failure, both in terms of impact and financial consequence. As I said, San Marco showed that even with a relatively small dam failure, lives are lost and liabilities are in the billions of dollars. So the key considerations are set out on the risk and consequence of failure are set out in this slide. And we've developed techniques to allow companies to understand the risk and the consequence of failures in terms of both social and natural capital and the financial consequences of failure. So we believe that only by understanding this, as well as the other elements that I talked about earlier, can a mining company demonstrate to stakeholders, investors, that the risks are understood and effectively managed. So my parting word is that relying on engineering is not enough. Understanding the consequences of failure and being able to demonstrate that you have understood that and done everything is possible to mitigate and minimize that risk is really important. And it will become more and more under pressure. Investors in particular and stakeholders will create more and more pressure around this piece. So a full understanding of the situation is really important. I think that's the last slide, Garrett.
Very good. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Alistair. So I believe that there's facility for attendees to pose questions in a Q&A session. And Arthur and Irina, are you on the line has to take those questions, or Olga?
So, gentlemen, there are no questions at the moment. I think we can continue if you want to speak about something else. So I believe you've covered everything.
Well, we
yes,
haven't covered everything, but we've covered what we were going to cover.
Yeah, so just to emphasize that ERM and CSA Global cover a full range of services across the mining life cycle. So what we've done here is focus on the key issues that we think are particularly relevant. Sorry, I heard a voice then.
Yes, hi. We got a question from Eldar Moldebek. Am I correct that through ERM we can attract investment for our deposits? So that's the question, yeah.
Okay, if I could ask Alistair to answer that question in the context of the finance points that he was making.
Yeah, happy to. We can certainly, and we do, help mining companies position their assets in a positive way for presentation to investors, whether that's via assisting with impact assessment processes, whether that's in designing management plans and management systems. So one of the services we do provide is helping companies develop bankable products and documents for their engagement with funds and banks. And having that documentation in place, or at least having a proposal for what you intend to do about environmental and social performance, is very important at the initial stages of discussions with banks, because they all have, or the vast majority of banks from whom you would obtain finance, now have what they call ESG requirements, environmental and social governance requirements, and they will start asking questions about environmental and social performance right at the beginning of your discussions with them.
Thank you, Alistair. Yes, so we call the service Fitness for Finance, and we can very rapidly assess a project to determine how well it aligns with the investor expectations, and if it doesn't align, what work needs to be done.
And I mean, if you engage, if you identify potential sources of finance early on, it is very important to establish a relationship, and then ERM can help you in progressively meeting the requirements of the bank as your design for the asset goes forward. The banks like to be involved early, and as Geraint's just said, demonstrating a fit for finance process, saying, well, we've already been thinking about your requirements, is a very positive signal to any investor.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Geraint. Thank you, Alistair, for answering the question. There is another question, I believe, from our colleagues from Mongolia. They're asking if it is possible to access your presentation and to get it by email. I know that you agreed to prepare a special presentation for all the participants, and then we would be very happy to circulate it among all the participants, if it's all right.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Geraint. There is also a question about availability of the recording of the webinar. I believe it will be available on this website, and colleagues from Minex can correct me if I'm wrong. Or we can also circulate the link, I suppose, to the recording. Okay. Are there any more questions, please? There is a question about uranium projects. Do you work with uranium projects? And what projects would be interesting for investing? I'm not sure if you understood the question correctly.
So certainly with we have experience with uranium projects, and particularly also our CSA global colleagues have considerable experience in uranium. And I didn't quite understand the second half of the question, though.
It's about finance, I think, Geraint. I don't know if Alistair's got a comment on that. I think it's a similar comment, isn't it, to before?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have worked on uranium projects. We are advising banks on uranium mines, both new and indeed in operation. So uranium is a mineral that finance is still available for. There is no negative attitude towards uranium mines. Clearly, they raise specific issues, and end use of the mineral is an important topic. But there is, I mean, certainly in our experience, financial institutions are interested in uranium assets, and you know, that there are protocols around what a bank will invest in, but those do not exclude uranium.
Okay, thank you. I hope we were able to answer your question, and if you would like more explanation or more details, please do let us know. There is another question from. The question is about the new environmental code of Kazakhstan, and the question is, to what extent do you think a new ecology code of Kazakhstan will change the attitude of mining companies towards the mine closure?
I mean, my understanding from the information I've been able to gain access to on the proposed revisions to the environmental code and the mining code is that although they are more onerous, I don't think that they should present unsurmountable or insurmountable problems for mine closure. In ERM's experience, certainly from a financing point of view, there is a clear understanding that mine cleosure needs to be carefully planned for. There needs to be a clear philosophy, and that national requirements should be met. But my understanding as an outsider is that the proposed changes both to the mining code and the environment code do not change the fundamental requirements for mine closure or make them unrealistic in terms of the amount of funding that would need to be set aside by the mining company to carry out effective closure.
Okay, thank you very much, Alistair. I'm just checking whether there are more questions. I think not at the moment. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, please feel free to ask any questions, because we're coming to an end of our session today. So you have a chance and opportunity to ask your last question.
Good morning, Olga. Again, this is Arthur. So we've got more questions streaming from our website. So there's a few questions regarding the investment in uranium industry. I don't know whether you have already been able to cover it.
I think the last one I saw, I think Alistair has covered it. I hope he has anyway.
Yes, I haven't seen any more questions come through.
Okay, great. It's a wrap. Thank you very much. If there's going to be more questions, we'll be collecting them and sending them to speakers.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Arthur.